Okay, so we're going to look at notes today titled Struggle in the Middle States. And it's titled Struggle in the Middle States because even though we're looking at actually more victories, talking specifically about more victories than defeats, even this, all of this is at a struggle, a great struggle, and lots of retreat and difficulty throughout all of this time. All right, so from New York, or from Boston, after the siege of Boston and the British and the British have to leave, and Washington and his army have surrounded Boston, and the British have to evacuate the city and leave, otherwise they're going to be completely destroyed. Everybody pretty much knows they're most likely headed to New York, and so that's a loyalist stronghold. That would be a good place for them, and then so therefore the Washington takes his army there, and they're preparing and trying to get ready for a British invasion and attack. Unfortunately, the American army is just poorly trained. They haven't had time to properly train. These are just farmers and citizens of the countryside, and they're not the military. They're not a trained military, and they're poorly supplied, and so they're outnumbered, untrained. They don't know how to properly fight a battle against the best army in the world, the best military in the world, in the British Army and Navy. And so, as would be expected in a situation like this, Washington's army loses battle after battle after battle, retreating from New York, and then to New Jersey, and then even on to Pennsylvania, and where they end up capturing Philadelphia and all these different places. And so Washington is retreating and retreating, and this high that everybody was feeling, this great victory that has happened at Boston, where they've kicked the British out, is suddenly followed by a series of defeats and defeats and defeats. And Washington is really just trying to keep his army alive, keep them, at least some part of his army. He knows if he loses the entire army, then the war is probably already over before it's even hardly gotten started. And so he's just surviving. But surviving by a thread, because he's not properly supplied and his men are not properly trained. What he realizes, though, is that he needs something. After all these defeats, he has to have some kind of victory, something to boost the morale of the people, and something to kind of change things up. And so that's what he plans why he plans the Battle of Trenton. And so after suffering all those losses in New York, Washington continues to retreat. Morale is low, and so he devises a plan where they will attack a relatively small force at Trenton in New Jersey, and it's going to be a surprise attack the day after Christmas. So on Christmas night, Washington crosses the Delaware River. You can see the picture in the background. On the next slide, I'll show you a clearer picture, but that's a famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. And they surprise attack the Hessians after a Christmas feast that they likely had the day before. Now, it is popularly told that the Germans, are kind of famous for enjoying beer, and it was Christmas, and they're also famous for kind of really celebrating Christmas, and so they were likely fairly hungover and things of that nature the following day. Well, there's no real evidence of that. There's no mention of that in any of the reports, and so certainly a soldier or two may have been impaired, but the Hessian forces were not at their leisure, as it is often said. And so they do it is a surprise attack, and so they're not really ready. And Washington is able, his army is able to capture 2/3 of the 1,500 soldiers. They surrender, and that means many others are killed. But this is a much needed victory after a string of so many defeats. And so the next slide, we're going to look here at that famous painting real quick. And so here you see Washington crossing the Delaware, and crossing. You can see it's a very icy crossing, and you see all the men in the background and these other ships as well. Now, this isn't necessarily completely historically accurate. There wouldn't be he wouldn't likely be standing up like that and what have you. The boat's not exactly the right kind of boat, but this is meant to really show several different people. One of the people that's in this is actually James Monroe, future president, but he's also injured in this battle at Trenton. He's the one holding the flag here. And so you can find out a lot more about this painting. There's many of these people represent different kind of groups. The way they're dressed and what the clothing they're wearing is supposed to represent different groups. We're not going to get into all that. But this is a famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. So here we kind of see the plan that Washington had. They crossed the Delaware River. You can see the Delaware River here, and right here is the Delaware River. You can see that, and they basically surround the city, so where the Hessians don't really have anywhere to escape to because they've got the river behind them, and so they can't go anywhere. There's no escape, and so they're surrounded. They're not really expecting. They didn't expect this attack to happen. It doesn't happen as early in the morning as they wanted. The crossing of the Delaware goes much slower than expected, so the attack happens later in the day. So they're not maybe as off guard as they could have been, but they're still off guard enough to where the Americans have a great victory. And that is followed up by a battle at Princeton a week later. And so General Cornwallis, he's the British general, he rushes back to recapture Trenton. He's not that far away at the time. And General Washington left just a few men behind to basically keep the campfires, lots of campfires going, and to make it appear, like there's, Washington's army is there still, and make enough noise to where it seems like a camp is, the military, the main army is still there. And so when Cornwallis arrives, he's prepared to fight, and he's ready to fight. And these guys get away, but Washington is actually attacking another British force at Princeton, which isn't that far away from Trenton. And this victory at Trenton and then at Princeton, these two victories kind of give Americans a lot of hope, and it helps and it brings some aid from France. Now, France is kind of secretly aiding the colonists. It's kind of an open secret. They aren't acknowledging that they're helping the Americans at this point, but they are hoping the Americans will win because the British are their longtime enemy. And so this does bring some aid from France. Now, the big victory for the Americans during this time is known as the Battles of Saratoga, or the Battle of Saratoga. It's really a series of battles that take place in New York. Finally, the British surrender at Saratoga. But the Americans are using guerrilla tactics to slow down and defeat the British Army. This is a large British army led by General Johnny Burgoyne of, like I said, a British general, and Horatio Gates. So Gates is the name of the American. That's really good handwriting there. Gates is the American general. There's also Benedict Arnold is another one of the Americans. And then we have Daniel Morgan is one of the third leaders during this time. And so these guys are kind of the leaders. And Gates is the head general, the main general in charge here, and he is going to get all the kind of credit for the victory, even though many reports say that it is Arnold and Morgan that really deserve the credit. They're the ones that really turned the thing around, because there were some times when it looked like it was going to go the other way. But the tactics that they're using to really slow down the British are guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run tactics. They cut down these trees, huge trees in their way, leave them all in the way. Sharpshooters kill scouts and officers first. Instead of just aiming at any random person, they kill Indian scouts first. And these Native American scouts, they really quickly realize they're the first ones being shot, and they don't have a near as big a reason to stay and fight in this. So many of the Native American scouts are like, I'm out of here. After they see that their friends are being shot first, they don't continue to help as much. Officers are being killed first, and this is a tactic that the British are not used to. They don't see it as proper way to fight in a battle, in war, and so the Americans don't feel that way, and this is their tactics. The goal here for the British is to try to divide New England from the rest of the colonies, kind of isolate. They see the New York as a loyalist stronghold. If they can, get New York under control, then maybe they can keep all the fighting basically to New England, and that's the only people, because that's where most of the turmoil has happened prior, and so the idea that maybe this will just be a regional thing, and the rest of the colonies will decide, we don't want to stay separate from England, and maybe this is this would be this war will end much more quickly this way. Unfortunately for the British, and fortunately for the Americans, the British lose here. They have to surrender. Thousands of men. General Burgoyne is blamed for this loss, but he's got a problem. Is that he's got this huge army that is meant for the open fields of Europe, and the fighting that will take place, in the coastal plains of the states of the United States, but not for the wilderness of upstate New York. And so this is he's got this large army in this area that they're just not meant to fight in, and so. They're defeated. I shouldn't say easily defeated, but they are defeated. This is really known. This is the turning point in the war, and the reason it's the turning point, it's not because the big reason it's the turning point is because it convinces the French to join with the Americans to fight the British. It convinces them to openly say, "We are your allies," which means they are declaring war on Britain, and this is going to take away British resources. They're going to have to now divert some resources to dealing with the French, and that's going to help the Americans a great deal. Not only does it divert resources, the French then begin sending more aid, openly sending aid to the Americans, 100,000 muskets and other supplies, and naval support, which the Americans have no navy. And so this is going to be key. And that naval support is going to be key to ultimate victory for the Americans at the Battle of Yorktown. And so that doesn't happen right away. There's going to be a series of defeats after this. This victory does not, those smaller victories at Trenton and Princeton and then at Saratoga do not lead to everything turns around and the Americans are just definitely going to win. No, there's dark days ahead, very dark days ahead, and difficulty will be, they'll face great difficulty still ahead. But at this time, things are beginning to look up, and the Americans are doing well.